as a director, don't have the expertise to know what makes a good soldier in front of a camera. I know when it's not working, and I know when someone looks hokey. What you try and do in your extras, you try and cast guys who've done this before or who are ex-military. And there's a lot of guys like that around.
Whatever irreality you have, whatever fiction must have a very strong base in reality. And in this movie, that's the case. The character and the equipment and the events are pretty logical.
50 Apple Alpha, take 2, 8 camera mark.
There are two sides of it. One is the technology, the gadgets, the equipment. The other side of it is the culture, the military culture, the way people actually react to one another. And I worked with the writer early on to provide a little background in both areas.
Dave Kennedy was invaluable to the process, and I don't think I could have written this movie if I hadn't have gone to the places he took us. Both logistically in terms of, I don't know, types of guns and battleships and tanks and what it looks like inside of a tank, and emotionally in terms of I don't know what it looks like inside those lives. To me, it was really important because I'm not a Special Forces soldier, because I don't know what would compel someone to want to join the Army. I really don't. I needed to get behind the eyes of those people, and Dave got me in the room with those guys so I could talk to them, and so I could ask them really pointed, really specific questions.
If you ever saw Lee Marvin in a movie, we still go on and on about this, but these guys, Bronson, Marvin, all these guys, you know, anybody that went to war and fought anywhere in any campaign knew how to hold a rifle, knew how to walk, knew how to move, knew how to look in through a doorway, and knew how to clear a room. Actors don't know how to do that, and nor do extras. So you've got to be very, very careful with it. You can have a lot of military advisors around, but in a lot of ways you've got to trust your own instincts. But more than anything, you've got to really watch your actors to make sure they don't look foolish.
We believe that the actors should have had a common real gun, real shooting experience as opposed to a prop gun firing blanks experience on stage. So we set up at the LA County Sheriff's Range a shooting school where all of the principals got a chance to shoot every weapon that they would have shot on the day.
Ice Cube and I did a lot of weapons training together so that we would look like we had trained together as Navy SEALs. So we were trained specifically how to shoot guns in that particular way, the way that they do. It seems like every time I do another film, I end up going to some tactical school with whatever type of training people I have to go with. So theirs is very specific as opposed to, say, the SWAT training or as opposed to the FBI training. So you actually see that Gibbons is a warrior, and a very skilled warrior at that.
The director came up and asked me to run the military ceremony, which is the burial of the Samuel Jackson character. And I organized it and ran a burial detail just as I would a burial detail for a comrade of my own. One thing that the military does better than any organization in the world is to say goodbye to people. So we handled that ceremony with the same kind of dignity, precision that we would a real burial ceremony. And many of the principals in that scene were young Marines from Marine Corps Base Miramar who had participated in many such ceremonies within the last several months. So that may be just a small vignette in the movie, but that's the kind of attention to detail that I think that we try to apply to every scene.
Typically, if we see a character that's to play a naval special warfare guy, a SEAL guy, or play an individual that normally would, or one would expect to be in top physical shape, we do spend a lot of time prior to production in getting them physically looking correct. But that's only part of the formula. The majority of the formula consists of the body language, the attitude of the individual. Is he boisterous? Does he have silent pride? The mark of the professional is the one that has silent pride, so he doesn't scream or yell about his conquest of the past. You know, you would never know who he is, and you shouldn't know who he is because, by definition, he's a stealth actor.
Ice Cube's character is not only a SEAL, not only a warrior, but he is also an officer. He has a great deal of responsibility to the men that he works for. It's paradoxical. You think an officer gives the orders and the men follow them. It's the opposite. In the military, the officers work for the enlisted people. They have a trust that is bestowed in them by their authority. So Cube's got to understand that. And in fact, the incident that is the cause of his downfall as a character in the movie is caused by his extreme loyalty to his men. That's the nobility and the honor of being a military person, is not the brashness and it's not the bravado, but it's that loyalty to the individuals that you work for and work with.
I always like fighting to look realistic. No matter what I do, even if it's a shameless action picture, I still think the fighting should look as realistic as possible, whether it's boxing, whether it's taekwondo, or even whether it's a gunfight.
I guess our biggest concern is keeping everyone safe, but pushing the envelope to the next level to be able to get the audience to believe that it's cutting edge, because the audiences today are more sophisticated. They want bigger and better, and that is essentially our biggest challenge.
When we read the script, and in our mind we have our idea of what the character is like. We start to break down the fighting style, his strengths, his weaknesses. Then we collaborate with the stunt coordinator, along with the direction of Lee, how he wanted the characters. So there's a chain of command that we follow. What we tried to do with the fight scenes was we tried to create an exciting environment that's appealing to the eye, as well as try to stay technical to the military aspect of it. So in that respect, we took the harder aspect of the martial arts and applied that again with some of the techniques that they would have in the military. With Cube, we wanted him to be a little bit more gritty. What we tried to do is create that street smart / technical side with him. He picked up very quickly. His first fight, he was in shackles. He had to fight without having to use his hands, so we utilized a lot of elbows, which Cube was really good at. His feet were also shackled, which led to a lot of limitations with the fight.
My true belief is always use the actor as much as you can, because that's what the audience came to see. They came to see that actor perform and do that sequence. And it's just better. Instead of shooting a wide shot and you can tell it's two doubles. All the actors that worked on this show did probably 95% of their own stunts. They're very physical, they had plenty of time to rehearse. The only time an actor won't do his own stunts is if there's a high possibility he might get hurt, then obviously you can't finish the movie. But in this situation, every actor out there was game to do it.
But you also can't train someone to do the entire fight. You've got to take it a piece at a time. So you work out an entire series of maneuvers. If it's a large fight, 12 maneuvers. Small one, 3. And you just work them through progressively, piece by piece. So, but when it comes to action, and certainly fighting action, I still tend to deal in real-time action rather than slow motion. I like to put people in confined spaces and have them use whatever weapons are available to them, rather than have a lot of space to be able to flip themselves around and change things.
A lot of times you have a lot of room and you start choreographing in an area where you have plenty of room, and then you get into that area and it's like, okay, there's not much space here. How are we going to utilize the space? And in that process, Mike and myself went into the galley and actually started to walk through different scenarios of what would we do in this situation.
90% of everything we come up with is not in the script, but you don't really get any credit for that. So he'll have a loose outline like, hey, the guy enters here, leaves here, the gas line gets cut, and he dies. You got to come up with everything else within that. If you watched the sequence and read the script, they wouldn't match. But that's where it becomes this collaboration, and you kind of just keep massaging it until Lee or RA goes, okay, you guys are on the right track, continue on that track. So as long as you work around that to make those story points work, you can use everything in the room, and then it looks obviously more violent, and it's harder to pull off, but it's more creative, I think.
As the fight coordinator, you want to be in the background and watching everything and making sure that the hits sell, the timing is right, and that emotion is there. Just like the script has its punctuations throughout, so does the fight itself. So we want to make sure that still carries out within each bit, because there's a lot of cuts, and if the intensity's not there, you'll see it in the final product when they make the cuts.
Hillbilly, you need to lighten up.
Look, everything's been done in the movie business. And so what we've got to do is we've got to find a way of doing it again, but putting our spin on it and making sure everybody kind of goes, wow, that's pretty cool. First, you get the director's input, his roadmap, his game plan, what he wants. And then what we do is we go in there and try to get as close as we can to exactly what he wants. Of course, there's going to be minor adjustments to his plan. And we go through it in baby steps. We set it up, we name each guy in his position, and everything's by the numbers, and then we start doing slow rehearsals. And then by the time we're up to speed, we're ready to shoot.
204, take one.
You know, when you're dealing with pyrotechnics, like that whole situation where things are on fire and all that, there's another point where now you're dealing with insurance and, you know, you can't put your actor next to danger. But as close as you can get into the fire with it being safe, you know, and shoot through the flames of the fire to look like it's on fire, there's little tricks that, you know, with flame bars and different things that we pulled off. Everyone has a job, everyone has a radio. So, you know, it's kind of like everyone moves together, stops together. Everyone moves back together, starts again. But if it's real close to the actor, obviously it's a double.
I tried to be involved with as many stunts as I could. I mean, they wouldn't let me stand next to the truck when it was getting blown up, you know. They would, you know, they stopped me from being decapitated by a car door as it swung next to me. I don't know, you got to check that out, but it was great because the guy who actually did the stunt missed it by that much. It was crazy, but he really got a kick out of that, so more power to him.
Stunt work, you're going to get dinged and bruised and knocked around. And explosions, just a concussion of them, can be deadly. And these guys, they can place a bomb and an explosion and a squib and just absolute perfection. I mean, I didn't have a guy, anybody, get any kind of a mark on them. The hairiest thing was shooting in a maximum security prison. I mean, the rest of it was a cake. I mean, we were in there with it was the real deal. I took the stunt team to the real penitentiary and shot him running across the roof, and all that stuff up there is with the double on the actual roof because they wouldn't let anybody else up there. And then we did all the actual helicopter. That's all real stuff. That's a real guy hanging, flying over the real barbed wire and all that. It was radical. I mean, we had this guy flying and missing the fences by 4 and 5 feet. We hung Mark Hicks on the chopper. We had a safety line on him, but he had to muscle up and climb up into this thing in a full banking turn. It was just amazing. That's the kind of thing sometimes you've got to just start shooting because, you know, if you start rehearsing with a guy hanging too long, it's just, the odds and the numbers start running up.
My worry about going into this was always, I didn't want it to just be another generic hip-hop soundtrack. That may be the popular culture of the time, but it's going to date really fast. Once again, it's becoming a cliche to just throw every favorite hip-hop track of the day onto your movie and hope that you get a hit album out of it. I think that's a little cynical business model, but I just think that music should be more integrated into a movie. So we knew we were going to have to deal with composed score. And Marco Beltrami, my composer, who's the perfect guy for this, because he's got a really modern, industrial type of sound.
This score in particular is a wonderful example of a combination of orchestra and hip-hop, and it's conceptually very unusual.
The score that I wanted to do was sort of bring more suspense element to it. Also, to me, the movie it's a little more tongue-in-cheek, and I thought it'd be fun to introduce sort of almost like a little bit of a 70s flair to it. And so I think thematically, I tried to lean a little bit in that direction.
I did come up against a roadblock of my own making. If you're going to put pop culture figures like Ice Cube and Exhibit in a movie, and you're going to set it in Washington, D.C., an East Coast urban enclave, very, very black enclave, you can't avoid dealing with what is the subculture of black music at the moment. Whatever it is, hip-hop, rap, its fusions are at the moment. You can't just suddenly shamelessly stick white rock and roll in there. It's just not going to work properly.
8 to 9, here we go. Everybody at 9.
So we decided to run with a more traditional course of composed music, really to hype up the action.
You know, one of the challenges in doing a movie is that, unlike just a temp score, is that you want it to have a cohesive sound to it. It has to work from beginning to end. Also, there's a continuity with the orchestration and little motives that you hear throughout the suspense stuff and throughout the action scenes. And so as the movie goes on, that you can tell that it's all part of one project. The sound, it's always the competition for music in many scenes, especially in big action movies such as this. As I work on these type of movies, I get more and more aware of having the sound work with the music as opposed to being something that you fight. In this case, the sound guys came, we sort of spotted some areas that were both big music and sound areas and talked about what they would be doing, what I would be doing.
First of all, in the mix, we have to decide where the music carries and where the sound effects need to fall back and vice versa. But by the same token, there's places where you want the music and the sound effects to be playing equally at the same volume. And in that case, what we have to do is we have to cut the effects and design the effects in such a way that they themselves have a rhythm that are complementary to the music. In that scene with the boat, we went out and recorded the boat. It has twin 250 outboard motors, and we went out and actually rented that boat. It's a big, giant inflatable with these twin 250s. We recorded those engines doing all sorts of strange things. Then when we got it back in the studio, we did all sorts of equalization and pitching and things to the engine to make it seem more aggressive and mean, coupled with all sorts of really fast, sort of water slicing bow wash sounds. And then when Toby arrives on the bridge, there's a cop car come bearing down on him with the siren. You want to make sure you have a really cool siren with those blips, you know, boop, boop, you know, when a cop pulls you over. I wouldn't know, but, you know, that concept. The launch off the dredge, it has to sound believable, yet it has to sound exciting. So this boat hits this launch, you know, we use this deep metallic hit coupled with the engine just pegged to its highest RPM and then flying through the air, and you hear this huge whoosh as it's flying through the air, and it comes crashing down, skids across this bridge, which incidentally is a metal bridge, which is really cool because it's a metal grate, so you can justify the rubber, you know, and you use like a tire drag to go across metal to create this weird sound of it sliding across and then impacting, and you make that a very clean impact, and then everything's gone. You punch up every little thing that happens. Eventually, one of the cop cars that ignites from the impact, it launches over the side of the bridge and comes crashing down in flames into the water. You've had all this energy and all this crashing and bashing, and suddenly, total silence. He's in the truck.
Mission accomplished.
It's gotten quite complex. The technology has just expanded exponentially. But the great thing is the variations you can do, the type of complex mixes you can achieve. It's really a great thing in many ways.
When you get into the final mix, it's almost like playing an instrument, really. It is really what it becomes. The console becomes my musical instrument. I've got all these flavors, and I can lean on one and push the other or fall back, all in, you know, sort of concert with what the music is doing, with what the dialogue is doing. If it's constant noise, the audience is just gonna peel back. But if it's moments of sound that build up to a peak and then fall down, you know, it's creating all those sort of peaks and valleys so that you take the audience on a ride.
What we don't want to have in this is any sort of hokey 3D elements. And we all know what those are when we've seen them before. It still has to be photorealistic, otherwise your suspension of disbelief just becomes less.
The very first meeting I had with Lee and Arnie Schmidt, the producer, was basically hearing Lee talk about his concerns about the fact that we're going to try and do a photoreal looking movie. He never wanted it to look like, well, that's a visual effect, and there's some way of detecting. He wanted helicopters that looked like they had weight. He wanted the camera to look like it was always bound to some sort of a device that really exists. We had really only about 10 weeks to do this whole movie. It was really high-speed production to try and make all the shots basically look real.
A large portion of our beginning work on the show is simply dedicated to collecting reference and studying reference and getting very familiar with what things would really look like. This is an example of a more old-fashioned shot. All that means really is that it's got a classic background plate that was shot by the director on location. That same background plate, which is now passed through our layout group, which is responsible for recreating the camera and then animating the vehicles in that plate. And you can see the bend in the rotor blades. And that came about through studying a lot of actual helicopters taking off and seeing what the blades did. And here you can see the final result. This is with interactive lighting that mimics exactly the lighting conditions on the set that day. We've put the Capitol building in the background and comped it all together with interactive dust and such blowing in the rotor wake, and that's the final result. And I took a look at the concept car, got familiar with the materials, what it looked like in different lighting conditions. We have a team that took a lot of pictures of it, and we modeled the car, matching exactly to the concept car that they had on location. And then we did some look development to get the materials to look just right and to interact appropriately in any given lighting situation. We actually did have several shots at the beginning of the car chase sequence that used the actual car on the set. And we didn't transition to the all CG car until some point after the car jumped onto the tracks and actually began chasing the train. So we did have some really good reference for what the car should look like as it's traveling at high rates of speed and in different environments. But it was also really challenging because that meant we couldn't get away with a whole lot. It had to look very photoreal. You know, the car was moving very slowly, of course. When it was moved into the back of the train, you can't really crash a car with an actor in it going 200 miles an hour. It's far too dangerous. So we did end up doing a lot of what we call repoing, repositioning of the elements to give it that sense of speed and to give it that momentum when it really crashed into the back.
When you do a shoot, sometimes it doesn't go exactly the way you plan, or it doesn't come across as looking real. So that's the whole idea of special effects, to try to fill in the gaps where filmmaking on sets can't quite achieve what they want. So some of the shots, they can shoot the actors against what we call a green screen, and we can replace the green with any kind of background we want. But certain camera angles don't allow for that kind of photography. So in situations like that, if it's a really dangerous situation and they can't even afford to have a stunt double in there, then sometimes we'll augment that with a digital stunt double. So our job was to not only do the surrounding footage of the character making his way from the Cobra car to the train, but to also somehow make the Cobra car look like it crashes convincingly. So again, we used some three-dimensional computer simulations to achieve that destructive look to the Cobra car. So they construct the three-dimensional car for us, and then we take the car and end up cutting it into pieces, because our job is to make the car crash. We pre-score it, so to speak, which means we cut it in all the pieces we think it should fall apart as the simulation progresses. And then we connect everything all back together again with dynamic constraints that hold the car together long enough for it to tumble and spin, and then we start releasing some of the constraints as if the tape or glue is coming apart, and the car's pieces start tumbling off into different directions.
So we mixed in a lot of real elements that we shot, and the right amount of blending between CG and live action always sort of pushes it more towards realistic looking images. That blend was sort of what we relied upon very heavily. The challenge here was that we had no plates. The only elements that were shot live were ice cubes, green screen elements. The rest was all synthetically, digitally created in the computer. Once he's jumped off, basically if you look at the green screen, it really is a man on the wire. There's wind and his angles are changing a little bit, almost like having a skydiver follow him down while he's jumping from a bridge that's almost a mile high. What we decided to do was take that, put the bridge, and then start moving the camera around and have it rushing down. So it looks like he's descending extremely fast. And what we did was we took the green screen elements and we sometimes changed the perspective a little bit so that it appeared like he was floating, skydiving, while his arms are out. So his descent speed is slower, and then sort of tip him over a little bit and start accelerating the camera along with him, because we tied the camera sort of along with the green screen element that was shot. So basically you have a foreground element of the green screen. If the background is moving really fast relative to that, then it appears like you're falling at almost terminal velocity of 120 miles an hour. And that was something that Lee really loved, because he wasn't sure what to expect. Once we started putting the shots together, he got really excited about the shots and really loved the sequence as it came through.
As I like to tell people, it's not a known path. You kind of confront issues as you get into it, and you hope that you've built all the right things, that you can plug in fast enough, animate them fast enough, do the layout fast enough, and render it fast enough and composite it fast enough to complete it with the schedule that we had.
Because our model shop here at ILM is so good in building very realistic looking miniatures, and so we sort of erred on the side of going with our past experience of other movies and actually building a 6-scale model. To be able to give the DP something to shoot and to know what he needed to shoot and how far the camera would be and what lenses to use, we mocked it up in the computer first. As the train exploded, we wanted the back end to go up and the front to sort of come towards camera and sort of burst apart. Then we went ahead and shot that, and that obviously had some limitations because it was so finely coordinated in terms of the amount of primer cord that actually gives you the explosion inside the miniature. All had to be timed so precisely. Some of this is fairly expensive, so we had really planned on 2 full models so we could get 2 really good takes. After we saw the first one, we thought there was too much fire. So instead of having the model tip over while the explosions were going on, we left it static and just had the explosions go through so that the side walls of the train completely ripped apart. We went back and took our train model and matched it to the take that had more fire in it. We mapped the exploding side, which is the second take, in the computer onto our CG model, and then went back into compositing and took these 2 radically different takes. With the help of a CG model in between, we were able to sort of combine it together.
It's this wonderful world of mix and match where we give the director a lot of freedom of choices how to tell the story and how to show images in the film, because there's a variety of solutions at any given time.
And cut it. Pretty good.